What is going on, soccer card fans? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. And today we are here with a video on the main aspects when buying a graded card in this market and what the important features are for when you want to go about doing that. Graded cards, from my perspective, are quite debatable. Some people live by them, some people think they're the most idiotic thing ever, and there's obviously a spectrum, and I lie somewhere in the middle, where there's obviously some times where it is very applicable, and there are other times where it is quite stupid to grade a card or buy a card that is graded. Obviously, it all depends, and that's why we're going to talk about these features today in this video. So the first thing we're going to talk about is paying the premium for PSA. Is it worth it? That's really kind of the first question when you get into graded cards, is which brand do you want to go with? Do you want to go with PSA? Do you want to go with BGS? Do you want to go with SGC? Do you want to go with HGA? There's all these three different letter companies and different orders that you can pick from. And everyone has their preference. The main one that is overly dominant in the hobby right now is PSA, and there is a huge premium placed on their higher graded cards. And so you have to go out then and observe the market and ask yourself, do I want to pay the premium for those 10s? Personally, I don't. With grading, it's a subjective human aspect, you know. Just because someone sees it as a 10 doesn't mean the other person's going to see it as a 10. If you've ever submitted cards for grading, you'll know there's times where you get a grader that's just incredibly harsh, and there's other times where you'll get a grader that's very lax and just kind of handing out 10s here and there. And so with that, not all 10s are created equal, not all 9s are created equal. So personally, I prefer subgrades and I prefer half grades because it can show you closer to what that card is. If a card is a 9.5 and you send it into PSA, could be a 10, could be a 9, you have no clue. They have no subgrades, so I can't tell what's wrong with it, and I can't examine it myself. So for that reason, I don't prefer PSA. I like buying their PSA 9s because I think they're still great graded cards and could be 10s in a sense, and so I think that's okay with me, and the market doesn't put too much of a premium on it. But the PSA 10s I avoid. I think BGS 9.5s are perfectly fine, and I also think the SGC 9.5s and 10s are really, really underrated by the market because, I mean, you know, with those cards, you at least, or those companies grading those cards, you at least can tell what's wrong with the card, and you can examine it from there and then go about it. And at the end of the day, when you buy a 10, you're really, there's no win. You know, if you buy a 10, in your mind, you're buying the highest graded card, but it could easily be a 9. It could easily be a 9.5. Now, some people might say, well, I'll never have to know that because I'm never going to crack the slab and it'll be a 10 forever. But one day, what if, you know, AI grading comes along and then there's this other company that you're going to have to submit to and put your cards in their service, and then maybe your PSA 10 comes back in a 9.4. And then from there, you know, you paid that premium and now you don't have that premium of a card. And so that's what I really focus on. At the end of the day, AI grading is almost an inevitability in the hobby. So whenever AI grading comes around, even if it's for PSA, there will be people that won't pay a premium for old 10s. They'll want that 10 to be regraded. We see that already with PSA having these harsher restrictions for higher grades and being a little bit harsher on the 10s. And people already pay a premium for these newer graded cards just because they're harsher. So when AI comes around, you know, people aren't going to pay that same premium from back then. The next aspect that you should focus on that's sort of in line with that is focusing on subgrades. If you have a company that has subgrades, it's very important to then be particular about how you go about that. Not all of the BGS 9.5s are built the same. There might be a BGS 9.5 that also has two 10 subgrades and two 9.5s. That's the best of the best in terms of 9.5s. But you also might have a 9.5 that has a few 9.5s and then a 9.0. And that's not essentially the same. And so you have to be weary of that going in. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to personal preference. I would rather a company tell me what's wrong with it. Eventually, I think that PSA will tell you what's wrong with it. I don't know if they'll do it on the card or in some sort of receipt that they send back to the grader. I think some way or another that should be a thing that we demand from PSA. One of the things that I'm a little weary of right now, I think PSA doesn't tell you what's wrong with it purposefully because then they're not as accountable if they're wrong. And in this time of them needing a lot of new graders and being a little bit stricter on certain things and all of these variables, I don't think that they want to be, you know, nailed down and held accountable for certain things that they do wrong. So personally, I prefer subgrades. I prefer half grades in cards, and that's something that I've sort of, you know, decided myself that I prefer. It's not the same for everyone, so obviously you decide that on your own, but that's one thing to take into account whenever you're buying a graded card. From there, the next thing is the card actually worth getting graded? I think a lot of people don't really ask this of themselves. Instead, they'll look at comps, and if the comp is close to what they're planning on paying for a card, then they'll say, wow, I got a deal on that card, I did good. But just because you buy a card at comps does not mean that that is a good buy, and it does not mean that that card deserves to be graded. Because, you know, with an example is PSA Prism 2014, Ronaldo, Messi. We always go back to that because it's basically the most important feature of the soccer hobby in my existence in the market. When those things boomed, you know, maybe you bought a Ronaldo or a Messi PSA 10 Prism for $1,000, $2,000, whatever it was at the time, and now it's a few $100. Reason that is because really those cards didn't deserve to be graded, and in my opinion, they really still don't deserve to be. But you know, people did pay that. So just because you might have paid close to comps doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing and buying that card, and doesn't mean that that card is really truly worth it. An example of this also that I experienced last year was the Topps Now Yusufu Moukoko card. 44,000 of these were printed. That was the print run, and basically one of the highest print runs at the time for Topps Now. I believe it might have actually been the highest. And so with that, you know, whenever it first got graded, it was selling for about $500 to $600. It was a $5 card you could buy on Topps website, and the first PSA 10s to come back were selling for an absurd premium. That always happens. Whenever the first cards to come back from grading are graded, people want to just go out and pay a ton for them. If you saw the Mac Jones Donruss, so that's sort of the same scenario. I think someone paid either $1,000, $2,000 for a Donruss PSA 10, which makes no sense. But, you know, whether it's shilled or whether it's just someone with way too much money that just wants to be the first to say they have it, I don't know which it is. But at the end of the day, you know, just because someone is willing to pay a price for something doesn't mean that you should be. You should have to do your own research, and you should be knowledgeable in and of yourself rather than relying on others to, you know, do that work for you. So at the end of the day, take a step back, look at a card and say, hey, in 5 to 10 years, does this make sense to have graded, and is it worth buying graded for that reason? And a lot of people that, you know, do these buying of these cards, they don't really think about that. You know, they just look at comps and then they go out and buy. And at the end of the day, if you have a card of a modern prospect, it probably doesn't need to be graded. Unless it's an absurd premium, maybe it's a serial numbered card that's just really, really hyped right now. A lot of the reason that people grade cards for ultra modern players is because they want to sell them and they want to have more liquidity on their card. And that's great and all, but at the end of the day, if you plan on holding that card, if you really plan on, you know, keeping this card for a long time, you probably don't need to have it graded. So that's something to take into account, and that's why some people find grading to be really redundant, because if you plan on keeping a card forever, you can grade it yourself. You know, you can look at the card, say, hey, that's an 8 or a 9 in my opinion. I like the card, I'm just going to keep it, you know? And then maybe one day if you have to resell it and you want that premium, then you go out and get it by grading, but you can always grade later. You know, some people don't think about that, but you can always do it later. You don't have to encapsulate it in plastic right now. You know, that option will be there for a long time to come. And so take your time. The next aspect of buying a graded card, and this kind of goes along with the last message, and that is be knowledgeable of the pop report. Don't just take the pop report as gospel, especially in soccer cards, a market where it is relatively new, and so people are not grading everything. There's still a lot of things that if you're buying international releases that are still in houses and basements and attics somewhere that just isn't even accounted for. And so really there are very few things in the soccer card market that are graded and you can trust the pop reports fully. Now we'll get there over time and you'll get a better idea and understanding as far as how things compare throughout the market, but you won't have a nailed on idea. Just because a PSA pop report says that doesn't say, it doesn't account for the BGS pop report, doesn't account for SGC pop report, doesn't account for how much is in someone's attic somewhere. You know, you have to take that into account, especially on newer cards that are just released in the last year or two. You know, all of those are not graded. And even with older cards, you know, all of those are not accounted for yet. So you have to take that into account, and you have to really follow how the pop reports are growing over time. The best way to go about that is make an Excel sheet of a lot of cards that you truly care about and track them. Every month, go on the PSA website, just look through a list of 10, 50, 100 cards, whatever you like, and just kind of map out how they're growing and how many new cards are coming into circulation. From there, you'll have an idea of how that's going to grow and how the demand supply kind of balances out. And that's a great way to go about it as well. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about, and is really a key point for me, and I think has helped me a lot, is do not buy cards with a very high cert number. What I mean by that is if you're looking at PSA, currently, if you submit a card for $150 or $300, you'll get that card back and it'll be cert number like 63 million or something. And if you were to submit a card a year and a half ago and it comes back from bulk, it'll be like 50 to 53 million. Maybe it's somewhere in there, essentially 10 million lower. And so what that cert number tells me is how much someone paid to get it graded. And I don't like the idea of paying an absurd amount to get something graded, because at the end of the day, the only reason that people have been grading stuff for $150, $300 is because the market sort of demanded that in the moment. There were so many people want to get stuff graded that there's people kind of cutting in front of line to pay for that premium. But at the end of the day, once PSA gets caught up, once PSA has more employees, those prices are going to come back down. You know, that's not going to be the norm. So essentially, whenever you're buying a PSA card that's graded 60 million to 65 million, currently you're paying an absurd premium for it being graded, which will be a premium that will not be there in the future. So you have to take that into account. It's basically money that's built into this card that will slowly diminish. And in addition to that, cards that have been graded in the 60 to 65 million cert number range, those are cards that typically people are sending out to get graded at a fast rate because they don't think the price is going to hold up. You know, whenever those Messis boomed up to $1,000, $3,000, whatever, if you really knew what you were doing, you'd send those bad boys in ASAP because you know that that price is going to fall and you want to be able to sell those before everyone else can. And so whenever I see something in that range of cert numbers, I know that one, people overpaid to get it graded, so that's going to fall in price in terms of that. And two, they more than likely were trying to cut in front of line to sell in the race to the bottom that people are going to perform over time as bulk subs come back and other people grade the card and whatnot. So that's one thing that I really recommend. If you're buying a card that's over $1,000 to $3,000, if you're buying cards in the thousands range, then you actually have to basically submit at that grade, so you do, or at that grade of service, so you do have to pay that premium. And so the facts don't align just the same. But if you're buying a card between $50 to $1,000 and it's in that range, there's a lot of premium that's being placed there that probably won't be there in the future. So personally, I avoid that almost at all costs. But that is going to be it as far as my main factors for buying graded cards in this market. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. On top of that, any ideas and tips you want to share with others, would love to hear it down below in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.